everyone. I want to use today to talk about sources and determining their reliability. So, one of the main things with sources is you do want to look out for things like spelling, grammar, if there's something mentioned that you know is false. All this will detract from a source's reliability. And you always need to keep that in mind no matter what situation you're in. A couple other things you can kind of keep in mind is that you want to try to find the principal source or the original source of this information. Otherwise, you're essentially playing a game of telephone, and hopefully the information remains true as it passes along from person to person or source to source. But, you know, you're kind of taking a little bit of a gamble because there's sometimes subtle changes, and eventually it may turn into something quite different. Once I assigned a group of students to find out how rain is being produced in Dubai. And some sources would say that they were using lasers. Others would say that they were shooting bolts of lightning from mountaintops. Another one said that they're using drones to salt the clouds. And finally, another one was saying they were using drones to create small electrical discharges to promote rainfall. And it was the last one, it was the true one, but it'd be hard to tell, especially if you had so many conflicting arguments from what would normally be considered reliable sources. So you always want to try to find the main source because that's where you're going to probably find the real information. Another thing that you should really consider is the author, and you'll need to do some research on the author. And this can be trying to answer the questions of, are they knowledgeable in that field or in that topic? So are they currently doing research on this topic? Are they currently employed and their work involves this topic? Those are things you need to be asking. There's been many times I've seen people write chemistry information about various things, and they probably don't have the credentials normally required for that. Now, I'm not saying that their information was incorrect. I'm not saying that they don't have the ability to learn this information. It's hard to know if you're coming at this with no knowledge. So you're trying to look for someone who does have credentials that you could most likely trust. There's been many times I saw historians, they may have a PhD and everything, but they have a PhD in history. So they're writing about chemistry. They may not know all the chemistry involved, even though they do have a PhD. Other times you might need to be concerned if you're getting a lot of information from someone who's very well written and renowned, but they're renowned as an author for fictitious novels. So you need to keep this in mind on what their actual job is or what their current field is. Another thing to keep in mind is how much experience they have in that field. If you're comparing someone who's been in that field for 20 years versus 6 months, I would probably have to use the person who has more experience if I'm looking for what is most likely the correct information. So if you're looking at a graduate students conference and they're just speaking about this matter, that's probably not as reliable as, say, a published article by a tenured professor. The other thing you want to look at is the medium. Now, depending on what the medium is, that kind of carries with it some amount of reliability. So, one of the main ones that a lot of people push are published books, or like your textbooks. These are highly edited, and normally the more edited something is, generally the more reliable it can be, or the more trust you can put into it. So with our textbooks, many times we have something like the 7th or 8th edition of a textbook. Well, that means that we have people in the field write the text that went into that original edition. Then this went on to a publisher. They went through and checked it for errors. A lot of times individual chapters went to other colleagues in that field and they proofed it. And then finally it goes out for distribution, and then we have many classrooms and other professors looking at this textbook, and they'll go through and they'll find a little error in there and be like, oh, well, at the back of chapter 3, question 4A has an incorrect answer. This is This is not acceptable. This is what the true answer is. And so by the time we get to like the 7th, 8th edition, hopefully many of those bugs and wrinkles have been ironed out. And you can normally trust most of what is said in there. Now, there's still going to be some errors. That's almost inevitable. But for the most part, you would be able to say, all right, you can take most of the information from there and use it. Another thing you can use are peer-reviewed journal articles. Now, these are research papers. Oftentimes, they're fairly technical, but they're normally highly reviewed. So, a research team will write up the paper. They'll normally have everyone in the group read the paper and proof it many times. They'll send it out to a publisher. The publisher will look at it and say, all right, well, we need to choose at least 3 people in your field. That'll get sent out to 3 other research groups. They're going to look at it. They're going to come back and say, oh, well, have you thought about doing this experiment? And the research group will say, no, well, we can do it, but it's going to take like 6 months. And then they spend 6 months working on it and then address all the questions posed by the reviewers. And then finally it goes out. Many journal articles do have mistakes. I've seen many of them. But, for the most part, you can hope that most of this stuff is fairly reliable because the author's namesake is on this. Patents, generally these are fairly reliable as well. If someone writes a bad patent, then someone else can make up their product, sell it, and they're in the clear because someone messed up on the patent. So oftentimes, while this isn't highly edited, it is normally fairly reviewed by the person making the patent, and they normally also hire a team to look at it as well as the patent office looks at it too. Highly edited materials, this can be any host of things. Probably one of the main ones that's more prevalent these days are videos. So there can be some highly edited materials that are done very well. I've seen several like PBS videos put on YouTube and other social media outlets. And in general, these are normally fairly reliable if the authors have the credentials, and you can normally tell that it was edited by an entire team, so they probably went back and reviewed it. So the more likely a medium is to be edited, or the ability for it to be edited, has a huge impact on how much you can trust the reliability. Informational websites, these are normally pretty good. You want to make sure that their main focus is to essentially educate, and you want to kind of watch out for any kind of bias they might have. But in general, if their main idea is to put information out there, all right, that might be okay. This is normally kind of, if I had to give it a black and white thing, this is more in the gray area. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. Again, a lot of this will depend on the author and their credibility. Then manufacturing websites, these are generally pretty good depending on what you're looking at. So if you're trying to find some technical information, let's say you're really fascinated by electric cars and so you're at the Tesla website. If you're looking up information such as, how far they can go on a battery charge, all right, well that's probably going to be fairly reliable, but keep in mind that that information they're posting there is probably best case scenario, because they're going to put their best foot forward. So you also have to keep in mind that manufacturing websites are generally trying to sell you something or make themselves appear well, even though most likely it is true, or at least it was true one time at some point. Personal websites, again, this is highly dependent on the author and how much editing they do to it. If it's a very polished website, things are very clean, it's very well written, no real grammar errors, that kind of stuff, and they are an expert in the field, okay, that might be fine. Even if they're an expert in the field and the website's kind of clunky looking, it has a lot of spelling errors, well, this is going to really detract from the reliability of it, so keep that in mind. Publicly edited encyclopedias, probably one of the main ones is Wikipedia. I would normally say this is not a reliable source because you don't necessarily know who the author is. I'm going to come back to this in just a second, but moving on. Email correspondence. Generally, when people send their emails, I've noticed that a lot of them don't proof them. Um, a lot of times I will try to proof them before I send out my emails, at least in my professional career. So I try not to send bad information out in my emails, but still mistakes happen. So you need to keep that in mind. And after an email is sent, it's not really edited again. It's hard to go back and change that. So this kind of detracts from its ability to be reliable because it can't be proofed and re-edited. Conversations and or lectures. With the exception of making some of these videos, a lot of times you can't go back and edit anything or change anything. So generally these can be good, but you still need to take them with a grain of salt, because if something is spoken incorrectly, or if something is in a lecture, if you're writing on the whiteboard, something might be written incorrectly. Mistakes happen, we're all human, and so you need to keep that in mind with the reliability of it. It won't be the same as a published book that has gone through the ringer many times and has been essentially fine-tuned. Blogs, posts, tweets, whatever kind of social media you're referring to. While these can have correct information, in general, this medium is not considered something that's highly edited, and it does take away from the reliability quite a bit. Like I said, it can be true information, and so talking about this a little bit, when you're going through and trying to work on say our project and looking up for reliable sources, you want fairly reliable sources. So in general, I'd say the things in this column are probably okay. Again, you want to look at the author, you want to try to see if they have a lot of misspellings and errors and things of that nature. But the ones in this column, while they could be used, oftentimes they won't be considered as reliable. So taking myself, for instance, I'm one of the experts in microwave spectroscopy. A paper that's published by me is going to be a lot more reliable than if I just mention it in a lecture or have it in a conversation with you. Now, hopefully I'm telling you good information. I would hope that's the case. But it's not something that's easily able for us to go back and review and say, oh, well, you misspoke here. It's not really 2.3 angstroms. It's 2.27 angstroms. Something of that nature. Or, let's say I'm writing a blog or doing a little post. If I'm putting something on there, it might be something I'm doing in the late hours of night, and I'm just trying to get something down there because, I'm so excited because of this new research, this new breakthrough that happened in my research. And it may not be 100% correct, versus when I'm writing a peer-reviewed journal, I'm going to be trying to make sure that I have everything right, because I don't want to drag my name through the mud. So keep in mind that the medium does have some impact on things. Now, when you're going through and trying to find information, I'll be honest, normally when I'm looking up for information, I'll normally go to Wikipedia. It's normally one of my go-tos. Now, while it's publicly edited, a lot of information in there is done really well. It kind of depends on what subject matter you're looking up. So looking at microwave spectroscopy, most of that information is correct, because a lot of people that ended up posting and writing that stuff were people much like myself who are doing microwave spectroscopy, and we just want to let people know what it is. And one of the beauties of, say, using Wikipedia is it can give you a good idea of your topic and some knowledge of your subject matter, so you can do better searches later on and have more knowledge when you're reading more difficult sources. The other nice thing with Wikipedia is it has sources at the bottom. They can go back and find where things were referenced and try to find that principal source. And that's normally where you want to go to before writing something about whatever topic you're looking at. So that would be a really good one. Textbooks, published books, those are normally pretty good too, because they normally have a very concise story that they're telling. Wikipedia sometimes gives you like way too much information on a particular subject, so you have to like pare it down, or you may waste a lot of time just looking up a bunch of things, going down a bunch of rabbit holes. It's not as concise of a story as a chapter in a textbook. Um, Peer-reviewed journals, while these are normally highly considered reliable, and most of them are, they can be difficult to read. They normally expect that they're writing to other experts in the field as well, so they can be read, they can be understood, but generally need some amount of knowledge before fully grasping what they're saying. So in general, I would say you probably want to start off with, you'd probably want to start off with, say, something like Wikipedia, possibly informational websites. Highly edited material is normally a pretty good one as well, as you get going. And then if you want to find a principal source, this might be a peer-reviewed journal. And with that extra knowledge you already have, you can probably glean more knowledge from there. All right. So that's generally things to consider when you're looking at your sources. Again, a lot of this relies on the author, and generally you want to make sure you find the principal source. The medium can have an effect on things, but just kind of keep in mind. So if you are, say, looking up something for this paper, you want to probably err on the side of finding more reliable sources or being fairly confident that they're reliable, versus if you're doing something for, let's say you're playing video games and you're trying to figure out how to do some sort of achievement. All right, well, I want to find some item on Elden Ring. I might be going to some sort of blog or post, and, if the information I was given is incorrect, I'm going to go through and be testing it out myself, so it doesn't really matter. Or I can look up multiple sources and make sure that they are relying or agreeing with each other. That's also something you want to try to do if you can. All right, so I do want to take a moment and talk a little bit about ChatGPT. And sorry for a small text here, hopefully y'all can read it, but I asked it, what's chemistry behind something a layman would find interesting? And I was actually really pleased with its response. It said, oh, well, you might want to look at chemiluminescence. It went through and gave me several areas that I could essentially talk about. So this might be actually a really good tool for you to use for the project if you so desire. I'm not saying you need to use ChatGPT, but this one actually spelled out a pretty well layout for how you could actually design your infographic. So I thought that was actually pretty cool. That being said, if everyone does one on chemiluminescence, I'll be a little dismayed. It will get really boring for me. So try to find something that you are very interested in yourself or hobby you have, and that'll probably be the best thing you can do. I did go on to ask ChatGPT for other examples, and it gave me things like acids and bases, pH. Again, broke down things into kind of some subcategories that would be good for doing further research on. My son is really into collecting rocks, and so I asked it, well, I'm interested in rock hounding. Is there something you can explain the chemistry of behind that? And so I went through and talked a little bit about different minerals and the colors that they distribute, and impurities you can find in rocks that actually give it some very unique characteristics. So you can probably use this as a tool for the project. I would say that's perfectly fine, legitimate. Kudos to you if you're able to do that, or if you don't need to use it, that's fine. I was so impressed by this, I went ahead and decided to give it some of the exam questions. And so here's an exam question I've used in the past. Granted, the format's a little different because you have to type it into a chat. And eventually, ChatGPT was able to get it correct. Now, this was on the third attempt of me kind of poking and prodding at it. But it eventually got to the right answer. So I would give you a warning about using ChatGPT. It normally doesn't do stoichiometry that well. It gets it right some of the time. Sometimes it just ignores it altogether. So take it with a grain of salt. When I threw into responses, I was able to figure out where its mistakes were pretty quickly because I've done a lot of grading with this. But you do want to be a little concerned if you're trying to use this on the exam. So I'd probably recommend not doing it because I'd say ChatGPT would probably be something like a D student. Gets answers right sometimes, but sometimes it doesn't because it's not going through the class. Um, and I don't know how much of that learning it retains. So essentially, I was able to train it up a little bit on stoichiometry, and then I was able to give me the correct response. Um, that being said, I don't know if that carries over to other people chatting with it. So when using ChatGPT, I did ask this question to it, and I think it responded fairly well. Um, I essentially prompted it with, if I were to explain a conversation with you to a student, I would say that you're like talking to a knowledgeable grad student over dinner. Would you say this is right? And again, as my question kind of states, this is what I feel ChatGPT is. It's not going to give you sources. It refuses to give any sources. Um, but it is fairly knowledgeable, and it sometimes makes some mistakes, but for the most part it's has a good breadth of knowledge. And so it says, yes, that's a reasonable analogy. Conversing with me is akin to having a conversation with a knowledgeable grad student over dinner. I can provide information, explanations, and insights on a wide range of topics, much like a well-informed companion who's there to discuss and answer questions. However, like any conversation, it's important to critically evaluate the information and consider it as a starting point for further exploration and learning, just as you might seek additional sources and expert opinions after a conversation. It's a good practice to do the same when interacting with me. So again, I can't. Main reason I want to include this is because I really like this last bit through in here where it says, all right, it's a good starting point. You want to go through and look up the information yourself. So, like most things, it's a good tool you can use. I'm fine with y'all using that, but keep in mind that if you use ChatGPT, say for like the exam, you're making the same mistakes as ChatGPT on the exams because I'm going to be running the exams through ChatGPT. That isn't something I want you to do. So, don't use it on exams, but for this project, I'd say it's a very good tool. If you do try to use it as a tool for exams, you're running a high risk of it being incorrect. So, just a word of caution. Eventually, maybe it'll get there. I just say right now it's not there, but I'm very impressed for what's considered to be a language AI on how much they're able to do. So, anyway, that's pretty much it for today and on sources, but hopefully you found this information useful, and I'll see you on the next video.